moment you stop playing along, they don't lose interest, they lose control. And when that happens, their behavior changes fast in ways most people aren't prepared for. Not because you did something wrong, but because you broke something that was working for them. You don't have to fight back. You don't have to confront anyone. You don't have to explain yourself or justify your decisions. You just have to stop participating in the system they built around you. The first shift that breaks everything is when you stop feeding their emotional system. Shift 1. Non-reactive presence. This is when you stop giving them the emotional responses they've been trained to expect. They say something designed to upset you. You remain calm. They create drama. You don't engage. They push your buttons. Nothing happens. You're not being cold or hostile. You're just not reacting the way you used to. Here's what changes internally. You realize that your emotional reactions were fuel for their system. Every time you got upset, defensive, or reactive, you were feeding the dynamic that kept you trapped. Here's what they experience externally. Confusion, then escalation, because the system that used to work isn't working anymore. They'll push harder, try different tactics, become more obvious in their attempts to get a reaction. This works because emotional reactions create engagement. When you stop reacting, you stop engaging with their control attempts. The manipulation loses its power because it's not producing the desired result. Here's how this plays out. Lisa's coworker used to make passive-aggressive comments that would upset Lisa for hours. Lisa would defend herself, explain her position, try to smooth things over. But when Lisa started responding with simple acknowledgement, "I hear you," or just silence, the coworker became increasingly frustrated. The comments escalated because the original tactic stopped working. Watch what happens when you stop being predictable. Shift 2. Unpredictable behavior. This is when you stop following the patterns they've learned to expect and exploit. You used to always say yes. Now sometimes you say no without explanation. You used to be available whenever they needed you. Now you're sometimes busy. You used to adjust your schedule for them. Now you make plans that don't include them. You're not being difficult. You're just being inconsistent with their expectations. Here's what changes internally. You realize that your predictability was being used against you. They knew exactly how you'd respond to certain situations, and they use that knowledge to manipulate outcomes. Here's what they experience externally. A loss of control over situations they used to be able to predict and manage. They can't plan around your responses anymore because your responses have become variable. This breaks conditioning because conditioning relies on consistent patterns. When you become unpredictable, their learned strategies for controlling you stop working. Here's the pattern. Mark's friend used to guilt him into changing plans by acting hurt and disappointed. Mark would always cave and adjust his schedule. But when Mark started sometimes saying, "I understand you're disappointed, but I'm keeping my plans," the friend couldn't rely on guilt as a control mechanism anymore. The unpredictability broke the conditioning loop. But this next shift removes their primary weapon. This is usually where they realize something's wrong, but they still don't understand why they're losing control. Shift 3. Silent boundaries. This is when you stop explaining, justifying, or defending your decisions. "I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available." No reasons, no apologies, no negotiations. You're not being rude. You're just not providing ammunition for arguments. Here's what changes internally. You realize that every explanation you gave was an invitation for them to negotiate with your boundaries. Every justification became something they could challenge or dismiss. Here's what they experience externally. Frustration because they have nothing to argue against. When you don't explain your reasoning, they can't attack your logic, question your priorities, or make you feel guilty about your choices. This works because manipulation often relies on getting you to defend positions that shouldn't need defending. When you stop defending, you stop giving them leverage. Here's how this looks. Sarah used to explain why she couldn't help with every request. I'm tired, I have other plans, I'm stressed. Her roommate would counter every excuse. It'll only take a minute. Your plans aren't that important. You're always stressed. When Sarah started saying simply, I can't help with that without explanation, the roommate had nothing to negotiate with. The boundary became non-negotiable because it wasn't presented as negotiable. At this point, you might be thinking, this sounds harsh. It's not harsh. It's clear. Shift 4, detachment from approval. This is when you stop seeking their validation, praise, or emotional approval. You make decisions based on your own judgment, not their reaction. You share opinions without checking their response. You pursue interests whether they approve or not. You're not rejecting them. You're just not making their approval the center of your decision-making process. Here's what changes internally. You realize that your need for their approval was the foundation of their control system. Every time you adjusted your behavior to maintain their good opinion, you gave them power over your choices. Here's what they experience externally. Irrelevance. They realize their opinions don't carry the weight they used to. Their approval or disapproval doesn't change your behavior anymore. This collapses the control structure because most emotional manipulation relies on your desire to maintain the relationship. When you stop prioritizing their approval over your own judgment, they lose their primary influence mechanism. Here's the shift. David used to constantly seek his boss's approval, working late to impress him, taking on extra projects to get praise. His boss used this by giving intermittent validation to keep David working harder. When David started making decisions based on his own professional judgment, rather than his boss's potential reaction, the boss lost the ability to manipulate David's behavior through approval and criticism. Now this final shift makes you completely inaccessible. Shift 5. Withdrawal of access. This is when you become less available, less accessible, less present in their daily experience. You don't respond to every text immediately. You're not always free when they want to talk. You have other priorities, other relationships, other interests. You're not punishing them. You're just not making yourself constantly available for their use. Here's what changes internally. You realize that your constant availability was being taken for granted and exploited. You were always there when they needed something, but they were rarely there when you needed something. Here's what they experience externally. Scarcity. They can't access you whenever they want anymore. They have to compete with other priorities for your time and attention. This reduces their influence because influence requires access. When you limit access, you limit their ability to condition your responses, manipulate your emotions, or control your decisions. Here's what this looks like. Emma used to be available for her friends' emotional crises 24/7, dropping everything to provide support. Her friend never reciprocated but expected constant availability. When Emma started setting boundaries around her availability, not answering calls during work, not being free every weekend, her friend had to start managing her own emotions instead of using Emma as an emotional dumping ground. Step back and look at what happens when you implement all 5 shifts. You stop reacting emotionally. You become unpredictable. You don't explain your boundaries. You don't seek their approval. You limit their access to you. Each shift removes a pillar of their control system. And when enough pillars are removed, the entire structure collapses. They didn't lose interest in you. They lost control over you. And their reaction to that loss tells you everything you need to know about what the relationship really was. Here's what most people get wrong. They think power comes from fighting back, from confrontation, from proving a point. But real power comes from non-participation, from refusing to play games you didn't agree to play, from withdrawing your cooperation from systems designed to exploit you. You don't have to fight for control. You just have to stop giving it away. These videos take hours of research into psychology, behavioral patterns, and real-world dynamics. If you want to support that work and help me keep creating these deep breakdowns, The Buy Me a Coffee link is below. And the moment you do, everything changes. Not because you became different, but because you stopped pretending the game was fair. If you're recognizing these patterns in your own life, you're not imagining it. And if you're ready to stop participating in systems that don't serve you, start by understanding how those systems were built in the first place. Watch my previous videos. You're being conditioned. 5 signs your mind is being trained without you knowing. And 5 hidden manipulation tactics people use behind kindness. Because once you see how the control was established, breaking it becomes inevitable. The game only works when you don't know you're playing it.